But
So
thank you for
smiling.
doing this. I'm so excited to chat with you again.
Thank you for having me. We really loved having you on Man Enough. And so I don't really, I'm not, I don't love doing podcast interviews, which sounds probably counterintuitive, but I had to say yes to yours because I think the work that you're doing is so important and so extraordinary and so rare. And I love the whole framework of the podcast and just everything that you're about. So
Well,
thank
that's
you for
really
all the
kind.
work that you do.
Thank you. I feel the same way about y'all, and I think that I actually went back and re-listened to our interview on Man Enough, and it was, yeah, it was just I was reminded of how much fun I had talking to you, and that
Good.
it really felt like, you know, a good fit. Like I felt safe with y'all. I felt like you kind of have the same goals, and it was yeah, it was a good vibe. So I'm glad that we're able to reconnect, and thank you for being willing to do a podcast interview even though you're not crazy
Oh my
about
God.
them.
No, no, no. I mean, I'm literally only saying that to, uh, yeah, shine the light on you and everything you're doing. I'm just grumpy, and I don't love talking about myself. So, but I knew this would be, sort of a really interesting conversation. And yeah, there's just
Yeah.
so few like conversations around disability and that then intersect with everything else that you're doing and masculinity and so yeah, I'm a big fan.
I talk a lot about my own childhood and how I heard an interview. I forgot which interview it was, but there was an interview with you where you talked about your childhood and having, like, there was some dysfunctional aspects, and there was some more neglect than abuse, but it made it a little more difficult to identify maybe some negative things that were happening as a child
Yeah.
until later on. And I've experienced a lot of really similar things. So I want to ask about that, kind of what was your childhood like, and what were some of the things that, at the time it's just all as a kid, but then as you got older you were like, oh wait, that wasn't probably the best situation for me, or the best thing that happened to me. So
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, the pandemic was sort of, this very traumatizing experience for everybody, and at varying degrees of severity, depending on, um, you know, what happened to you, what happened to people that you love, what fields you're in. Were you an essential worker? Were you working at home? Were you isolated? Were you having to deal with this sickness and illness firsthand, like and for me, yeah, there was certainly a lot of difficulty during that time, and I had already, yeah, I come from a family that like talks a lot now, and where things are discussed to a point where sometimes I was like, can we not talk about the most traumatic things ever? Like, could we just be like a normal quote unquote family and pretend like, everything's okay and just kind of put on a smile, which was never how, yeah, sort of things really functioned in my family. But yeah, I grew up with, a lot of, there was a lot of sexual trauma in my family. There was a lot of mental health issues within my family. And so I grew up in sort of honestly a little bit of a fog of, sort of not knowing what was going on. And back then, we didn't really talk about things like that. So
yeah.
suddenly sort of when I was 8 or 9, things just, yeah, my, parents weren't available in the way that I kind of needed them, and things weren't explained to me because I was young, and things were also, when you have there's mental health issues with any kind of parent, they're trying to figure out what's going on with them, let alone trying to explain it to you. So yeah, there was just a lot of feeling, yeah, just like everything was my fault, because things weren't explained. When you're a child, you just go directly, yeah, you don't go, oh, what's going on with my parent? Why are they acting so weird? You go like, oh God, I must have done something. It must be me. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there was a lot of self blame, and it's still a pattern that I fall into. A lot of people do, right? Like, even when you are interacting with a stranger, like if a stranger kind of looks and scuffs at you, you'll be like, did I do something? And so if it's someone you love, if it's someone you're in an intimate relationship with, like, then it's heightened. And so I would have heightened reactions in certain, romantic or friendship settings where I was like, whoa, this doesn't feel like it's about the thing that's going on. It feels much older, right? So, yeah, during the pandemic, I hit some hard times and had to face a lot of those demons and do a lot of work around that, and it was incredibly I'm incredibly grateful for that darkness, even though it was hard to get through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also interesting because I relate so much. I've heard you talk about like having a lot of coping mechanisms, and I I do as well. I have a couple of castmates on the show that I'm on, that we're shooting in Utah right now, and we talk about it all the time. How like I fawn a lot, and I
Mhm.
when I'm around certain people who I don't feel safe around, I make fun of myself a lot more. I'll poke fun at my disability. I'll do things like that, and it's like things that I don't like it's just like this instinctual childhood thing, because that's just kind of the cycle that I found myself in as a child. And one of my friends actually who I had talked to about, you know, the fact that I do make fun of myself more when I'm around people I don't feel emotionally safe with. And I there was an instance where I'm standing with my friend, someone started to kind of poke fun at me a little bit in a way that felt a little mean spirited. So I started to join in and laugh and be like, "Oh, this is fine, everything's okay." And I was
Mhm.
automatically back at like 14-year-old Jordan in the like hallways in high school. And my friend, since we had just talked about it the day before, looked at me and he was like, "You don't have to make fun of yourself." And he said it loud enough for the other person to hear. And I was just
Oh,
like, "Oh my gosh, he's right. Like I'm doing that." And then the person made another joke, just trying to see like, is this going to continue to be awkward? And then there was no response. So then since then there hasn't been any jokes at my expense. So it was like a really empowering moment, and it made me feel so good having a friend that was able to kind of hold me accountable while also holding this other person accountable. um
mhm.
so like what have some of your coping mechanisms been that you've been trying to like work on since kind of discovering all of these things?
Yeah. I mean, how much time do you have? And I love I love that story, and I love that whoever was there, sort of pointing out you don't have to make fun of yourself, right? Like that. I love those people.
Yeah,
I love when people notice things, right, and say them, and again, that person could have been like, "Hey, that's not okay," or made a bigger deal, which maybe would have actually made things worse for you. But yeah, there's a way to sort of, I don't know. I love when people notice those things, right? And
yeah,
it's sort of having an inclusive mindset, which I think is, we need more of those sort of people. And but yeah, like so many. I mean, I tuned out a lot, like a lot. I loved, and I have I got a late diagnosis with ADHD in my 30s, which then, you know, well, I was like prompted my mom. My mom has it too, and she's now kind of accepted it. But it was years of me being like, "Hey, like this thing that we do that's like crazy. This inability to, the fact that I mean, there's so many examples of just being again very forgetful, losing a lot of things, being unable to manage, time or space in a way that's really difficult. Like there's being very impulsive. Like there's so many things that my mom and I share that when I got diagnosed, I think it was, yeah, help. And it's common with neurodivergence or learning disabilities where the child goes undiagnosed because the parent has it.
yeah,
Because it's often, has to do with genes, and sometimes it's passed on, through environment, through epigenetics, so many different things. But often the parent learns that they have that learning disability too after the child has been diagnosed. And when the child is struggling, for me, it was just so, when I look back, it's just so clear. Like, I lost every lunchbox I've ever owned. I lost every bus pass I'd ever owned, every wallet, every handbag, every camera, every, like, you name it. I would lose other people's things. I would lose my sister's. I would, like, do the thing where you steal your sister's cool new, Kangol
Yeah.
hat, so 90s core, and then I would just forget it on the bus, and it would be like my whole world would end. I would just be like, how am I not able to just do this simple thing? Why does everyone seem to not do this and I can't? And I was called careless, and for me it was careless. Like, careless was like the insult, like, or not the insult, the thing that defined me, and that I heard a lot at home. And obviously I know it can come off that way, and I've sort of leveraged that back to myself when I do something that, like today, showing up this podcast where nothing, not having thought out the plug difference and sort of the technical
Sure.
issue, I feel like an idiot, and I felt like I wanted to not show up. I was like, I can't turn on the camera. It's gonna, like, I feel ashamed, right? Like, and there's a lot of shame that comes with it. And I'm going on a whole ADHD tangent, but yeah, like, I think tuning out things I became really good at. And I used food. A lot of children who grew up in dysfunction use food. It's like almost just inescapable, honestly, like, that there's some kind of food issue. And often in adulthood it's, maybe it's overcome, but like, it is so common that food is, it's readily available and it's soothing, right? And it's a way to nourish yourself, to feed yourself, right? Of maybe what you're not getting, and what you're not able to get. So I had a lot of issues with eating disorders, which are tied to ADHD too, if you don't know. Learning that was like really huge for me too. Like, there was just a lot that you yeah, you just start realizing that coping mechanisms are not, I mean, it's sort of like the Gabor Mate, sort of way into it, which is like, addiction is just solving a problem, right?
Hmm.
It's actually just a solution to a problem. It's not the problem. And so once you're able, I mean, it obviously becomes a problem for people who are addicts, but like, yeah, going to the source of, like, why am I doing this? When did I start doing this? Is much better than, like, why can't I stop doing this? What's wrong with me? And that whole,
Yeah.
which I did for a long time. And I'm sure, I don't, with your coping mechanisms, you did too, which is like, then you turn your own coping mechanism to try and heal, cope with pain into more pain,
Yeah.
by then. And that's the thing. It like, addiction is then that becomes that ruins your life, right? And it's not your fault. I mean, it's never your fault.
Yeah.
And I think if we started there, I think we would be able to solve it much more,
Yeah.
effectively.
And it's sad too because like if I heard someone making fun of someone else's disability, I would go off and I
Right.
would never join in like making fun of the disability as well. But when it's myself, it's like it's just like this automatic thing. Just like with you, if I was having technical difficulties, you probably wouldn't be shaming me. And it's like, but then you do to yourself. So it's like
Right.
it's really sad that we do that to ourselves. But I'm so glad that we're able to identify it now and address it. My wife actually recently, or a couple of years ago, found out that she is on the autism spectrum, and
Oh.
um, once she realized, she was like, "Wait, that explains my mom," and she realized all that stuff about her own mom, and like all these things that used to annoy her about her mom growing up, or things like that. She's like,
Yes.
"It's because we both had this
Have
same
it.
thing," and
Yes.
her mom at first was very, I'm taking this headphone out because it keeps messing up, but her mom at first was very like, wasn't, she kind of denied it, or was in denial, was like, no, like we don't have autism, because she had in her mind like what being autistic meant, or what it is, or like
Worse.
the
Yeah, yeah,
certain
yeah.
stigmas that come with it. But then as her mom read up on it, she was like, oh, that makes sense. And then she started to think that about her own mom, which there's a lot of things too. So it's like a because now my oldest daughter also is autistic, and she
Uh,
is, it's so interesting seeing how like my wife, in discovering these things about herself and like going back to childhood and being like, oh, I felt a lot of shame when my parents would, like when I couldn't figure out like how to do this math problem. I just couldn't figure it out. And I felt so stupid. I felt so like I just had to
Mhm.
fake everything. So it totally changes the way we're able to approach our daughter because we don't want her to have those. I'm sure we're doing something
Yeah.
wrong in there that's gonna she'll grow up and be like, hey, I didn't like when y'all did this. But we're at least with those specific things able to tweak the way we communicate to her so she's not having that same negative experience. But I loved what you said about like a child being diagnosed and then discovering that about their parent, because that's exactly what
Mhm.
um
Mhm. It's and it can be very healing, I think if the
yeah.
parent, is open and obviously, but I think it takes both parties being, uh, forgiving and understanding and, patient, and I think a lot of this, childhood, work, or inner child work requires a lot of compassion for parents, I think it you and hopefully you're working through this with someone who is reminding you of that, because I think sometimes it can backfire where you just are resentful at your parents, and
Yeah.
that's where it stops, and of course there will be a stage where you are angry at them, I think that's a normal, I think that's probably, again, your your child, every child will feel some type of way that's not no necessarily butterflies and sunshine about their parent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I was like very hard, on them when I started doing this, because you're kind of discovering things too, right? That anyway, depending on what you're doing, like you're remembering things that you maybe have, filed away or sort of suppressed. And so when those things come to light, it can be, it can make you angry, but actually having compassion for the parent also is actually easier for your healing, because if you can reframe, because if you stop at resentment, you just go, if they loved me more, they wouldn't have done that, right? If they cared more,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have done that. And that's so, I was stuck there. Like, and I would repeat that pattern in romantic relationships where if anything didn't go the way that I expected it to, I would conclude that it's because they don't care about me, right? And it's like there are so many reasons why people act the way that they do, and most of them have like literally nothing to do with you, including again your parents,
Yeah.
unfortunately, like they were full people before you came along, like, and it's hard to remember that when you're little, like when you're a kid, we're still kids, we're still
Yeah.
kids, and yeah.
It's I was in LA a few months ago, and my mom was the most supportive, loving, encouraging person in the world, and I probably genuinely wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for my mom,
Mhm.
and her support and that belief in me. But she, because of that support and belief, she allowed me to go to LA from like 13 to 18 for at least half of that period, to pursue acting. And she had my other siblings back in Texas. So I was out there at least half of the time from 13 to 18 living with different families and
Uh,
roommates and acting teachers. And when I was in LA a few months ago, I was out there for some like press stuff and I had a day off. So I was like, I'm just going to drive around and look at like my old stomping grounds and the old houses I lived in. And I got up to 18 and it wasn't even all of them. And I was just thinking of like, oh, wait, I remember I lived with this family for 2 months that I didn't know. And then I lived with this acting teacher's brother on his couch. And like all these things where I was very fortunate that I was never abused or anything. But there were some pretty like sketchy situations I found myself in, and
yeah.
times where I was scared or alone,
Mhm.
or isolated. And it's like I've really struggled as an adult and in romantic relationships with abandonment, fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
Um, and I never like looking back, it was never clear. I was never like I didn't have a thing to point at and be like, that's why I feel abandoned. Like my dad left us. Like I didn't have a thing like that that made me that I could trace it back to. But
Sure.
then as I was driving around in LA looking at all these places, I was like, oh, I was like in this really formative time of my life. While my mom was being supportive, there was also like the
Yeah.
absence of that, of my mom, the absence of like my family. I didn't have that, their physical support, or like, I was, they were supporting me in my dreams, but like I was missing this whole other part. And it was kind of
Mm.
this eye-opening thing that was really, but again, it's like no, I didn't feel resentment. It was more, I understand, like, especially the more I've learned about my mom and learned about my dad and why they are the way they are, I
Mm.
empathize with like, oh, I get why psychologically they took that approach or why they handled it this
Sure.
way. So it's so interesting.
Yeah.
But I want to, so my,
Yeah.
speaking of my wife, and once she's just, now that she's discovered that she has autism, one of her special interests has been, she grew up in a very like conservative Christian household. She's been deconstructing a lot of kind of toxic teachings that she had growing up, and within our relationship, we've been going through like couples therapy and working on like um, some toxic mindsets towards male female friendships. That was always a really big obstacle that we butted heads on, because I only felt safe with women. I all my
Sure.
best friends were women, but my
Mm.
wife grew up in a household where, because of, you know generations of trauma caused by men,
Right.
it's like, no, men, like men and women can't be friends. Men only want one thing, and all of this stuff. So it just, we're always butting heads on that. But since then, we've kind of been going on this journey of like reevaluating what faith is for each of us, and unlearning some harmful things that we were taught. And one big area is feminism. Like that's something that my wife, before growing up, it's like that was a bad word. Feminists, like it's, they're crazy. Like it's all this kind of like
Yeah.
these misconceptions about what feminism is. And I see TikToks of people saying like, the feminists are going to hate this, but I'm a stay-at-home mom that cooks for my family. And it's like, that you can do that and be feminist
Yeah.
too. Like that's
Yeah.
and so she's gotten really, because she never felt like she had a voice growing up, my wife, and she felt like she couldn't speak up for herself online. She's gotten very bold, and like, if she sees, and she's like a justice warrior, if she sees someone saying something that's like misogynistic or racist or whatever, she's like, I have to tell them that they're wrong. And like, she jumps in, and she's kind of figuring out, how to approach all of these situations, but she's really passionate about it. So I wanted to ask, how did you start getting actively involved in the feminist movement? And at what point did you start to kind of focus a lot of your energy on men's role within the feminist movement?
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. I'm curious, like, what, because I'm sure maybe you've talked about this on your show already, but like, how has her autistic diagnostic sort of changed your relationship? Because I think we, have this sort of stereotype of what an autistic person is like. And again, we jump to, I mean, I think one of the biggest stereotypes is like they have less empathy, or they don't have empathy.
Yeah.
And it's actually the opposite, but the way that their behaviors can be interpreted by neurotypical people is like, well, if I did that, that would mean I don't care about this person or whatever. But it's like, it's
Yeah.
totally, so anyway, I'm totally interested in that.
Well, I'll answer it really
Yeah,
quickly.
sure.
So for the longest time, we only started therapy individually or as a couple, and as a couple, over the last year and a half, and it's
Yeah,
been the biggest. I've always been an advocate for therapy, but there was always a reason not to. Like, we didn't have the money or whatever.
sure.
And I'm so grateful we finally like bit the bullet and did it. And it was one of the biggest things was like we would get in arguments or have like a disagreement, and it was that exact thing where I felt like she was being cold and distant,
Mhm.
and that would trigger my fear of abandonment.
Sure.
I would feel panicked. I would feel like flooded. And it's like she would be needing space, but it's like I would need, like, we have to fix this now. Don't leave me. Like, and it was this cycle that it was just so hard to break. Um,
Mhm.
but it's just the more we've understood these things about each other, it's helped create a lot of empathy. Um, and one thing we've learned in therapy, which I feel like you've really applied a lot of these techniques in the way that you interact with men, it is like I messages, uh,
Yeah.
so then we're not making the other person feel immediately defensive. And, being able to, like, it's not our responsibility to manage someone else's emotional response to what we're saying, but
Yeah.
we, at the same time, if we can word something or phrase something in a way that will make it more palatable and easier for them to receive, then it's going to be a more productive conversation for everyone. So I feel like you've applied so much of that in what you do, which I love.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that there's like a lot that we've taken from it and grown so much.
I mean, that's wonderful that you've used it as an opportunity to, yeah, learn more about each other and connect more. And I think it's also like really important to share that, or I think it's great that you're sharing it, because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people, even, people don't think about this, but like being in a relationship with someone who has ADHD is also like challenging, right?
I'm
Like
sure. Yeah,
when I was diagnosed, that it was a lot, obviously, at work and with school and, sort of my own life that I could see was unmanageable. But I also realized, like, wow, it's also affecting my relationship, or my relationships, and again, things that I do can come off as careless to other, or that I don't care about you. And that was really happening between my parents, where like my dad was interpreting, yeah, my mother's, you know, some of her unmanageable sort of behaviors, as like her, because he's the opposite. He's so detail oriented. I don't want to diagnose him, but like whatever is on the opposite end of ADHD,
there's
that's
something there.
him.
Yeah,
Yes, something there too, where it's overly, needs order and, and attention to detail. So it's like you put those two people together, and it's yeah, challenging, and like, so anyway, that's like a whole tangent, but yeah, I think it's important to talk about those things, and it can just increase understanding.
yeah,
And also, then you also know, like, maybe this isn't something I can, right? Like maybe my fear of abandonment is so pronounced. Like I
yeah.
do need that physical proximity, and the maybe I can't do that. And then, you're not staying in a marriage that, hurts the both of you, right? So I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
it's a way to be, just honest and sort of live in radical acceptance. But yeah, how I got involved in feminism was, again, I just grew up knowing a lot about patriarchy and seeing the consequences of it, honestly, of like sexual violence and just, yeah, a lot of the issues that were in my family history stemmed from sexual trauma. And so it was very it was very intolerable for me that
Mhm.
that just happens, and it's happening to, the women in my family that I love them. Like it just was like my brain broke. Like, and then I spent most of my life kind of trying to fix that. And I got involved, I was a women's studies major. I did gender theory and social policy for a master's. And it's while I was doing my master's that like I got involved with the 2012 Olympics were happening, and I was living in London studying. And I started this petition around female boxers because they wanted to force them to wear skirts, to be more elegant. And I was like, okay, like, let me write this, start this petition. But like, I don't know, I never thought it would like work, because I was like, nobody knew me. And I Twitter was like a couple years old, but I had like maybe 100 followers. And so, but then, yeah, the petition blew up and it got all this attention. And the International Boxing Association reversed their decision, and like it worked. And I was just like, whoa, like the internet is this really cool thing.
Yeah.
And look at all these people I can connect with that I would have otherwise never been able to connect with. So, and so, yeah, I became a journalist. I moved to New York. I mean, I'm skipping over like so many failures, but got rejected for so many jobs, thought I would have to move back to Canada, which is where I'm originally from. And then, yeah, got a job as a blog, like a feminist blogger, a job, unpaid internship. And then, yeah, sort of again with my background, and I think the moment we were in 10 years ago, there was a lot of hunger for feminist analysis. There were I mean, almost no female voices in journalism. And I take that back. There were so many female voices, they just weren't being, featured,
Amplified. Yeah. Yeah.
and amplified. And like things were like in the in the pink section of, like there was literally like a woman's section on the Huffington Post that was pink for like our stuff, like human rights, like, and so something niche like that, so it was a very exciting time. And I was sort of at the right place at the right time. And then as I started working on a book proposal, Trump was running, it was 2015. There was a lot going on. And I became really interested in why men weren't feminists, like why weren't men in these rooms. And once I started talking to men about feminism, that's when I was like, I thought this was like going to be like sort of a snarky book, like a here's how to be a man, a modern man that's
Yeah.
like actually good. But it ended up taking a different turn once I interviewed men about masculinity, which often I was the first person to even ask them a question about their gender, let alone ask them what's hard about their gender.
Yeah. I
And
love that
so
video, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was very eye-opening for me. I mean, again, talking about compassion, I mean, not to diss on my, on my, sort of scholarly, career or time in school, but like there was maybe 1 week on masculinity, there's maybe
Yeah.
a week where we talked about men, and it was like, well, should we involve men, should we give them resources because we're taking away from women? And as I was doing research, I was like, no, 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 like, oh my god, we have it all wrong. Like when we include men, like we need to talk to men, we need to have resources changing masculinity. And in fact, like it's like work smarter, don't work harder, like we're throwing
Yeah.
so much at this, and standing on the shoulders of all the women, and particularly the Black women, the queer people who have, given us all of the scholarship that we have, and nothing would be possible without them. But I also was, kind of craving a more mainstream, sort of inclusion of men in these conversations. And I didn't
Yeah.
know how much they benefited from feminism. Like I was uncovering all of this and I was like, wait a minute, I feel like we should be saying this more, and the criticism, was like, well, why do men have to gain, from being part of a movement? Why do they have to, selfishly? And I was like, but like, they do, so why would we leave that part out, like, we're sort of invested in this adversarial, sort of story, right, of the gender war. And I, yeah, became really interested in like what could be a different story.
I love that. And I love you mentioning like specifically Black women and queer women. And I feel like with me, like, so growing up as a white straight man, I obviously have a lot of privilege, but I'm so grateful. It sounds weird now because as a kid or as a teenager, I never would have thought of it this way, but I'm so grateful for also having a noticeable, visible disability
Mm,
because I was able to experience the privilege that white straight men get, but then I was also able to very easily identify the toxicity that can come with that. And I found myself on the outside of like, or like within the hierarchy of men, you know, I could see the oppression and the discrimination and like, you know, being made fun of, like all of these things as someone with disabilities, which I think helped make it easier to see it when it was happening to other people. Um, and then I was raised, you know, by my mom, and always, because the boys were beating me up, I was always closer to the women. So it
Right.
really helped. But I didn't really critically start thinking about a lot of it until really Trump as well. Like running that first term, and
Yeah.
I remember, like, you know, growing up in Texas, I was always kind of told that it's like the Democrats are the bad guys and Republicans are the good guys. Like that was just how I remember a friend in high school saying they voted for Obama, or that their family did, and I was like, why? And I knew nothing about any of it because I was like, he's a Democrat. Like it was
Right.
like I couldn't fathom it. But I knew nothing about politics. I knew nothing about like policies or legislation or any of that. But then I knew what I felt like. I was in theater. I had so many friends in the queer community. My best friends were women. I, you know, had friends of all different races. Like I was exposed to a lot of different groups and perspectives. And then once I saw like Trump making fun of the disabled reporter, and I saw different you know, like doing the debates and all of these things where he's talking negatively about women and bragging about sexual assault, I was just like, holy shit! Like, how is this real? How is this like savior of this party? Like, what is happening? And I felt like Will Ferrell in Zoolander, where he's like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I felt insane, or like the world was insane, and maybe like I don't
Sure.
know, it was just wild. And then I started getting really into, because I realized how it was affecting me personally and the people I love personally, and how but a lot of them didn't even see that it was affecting them in a negative way. You know, a lot of like women in my life that like were making excuses for the things he was saying about women and like all of these things. So
Yeah.
I became a lot more invested in our country and the laws that we have, and politicians that are running, and the policies that they're running on. And now I slowly, it was interesting because I was deconstructing my own political ideology, which was just basically all it was like what I was told it was. And then as I started to like put my own feelings and opinions into it, I was like, oh, that doesn't align with any of this. So
Mhm.
I started to shift. But then with my wife, again, like growing up in a very conservative Christian home, I started to just kind of drop little like nuggets of like, hey, I don't know if I think that I agree with this. And like it started to create a little friction until we both, I think it gave her the nudge too. So then we both started kind of going on this journey of like, wait, like what are all these things we've been taught? And it was, I think that's a big key for like all, you know, being able to humble yourself and like look in the mirror and say like, what role have I played in all of this, and then trying to correct it. Um, but what have you found in dealing with men, and even like a lot of women that are opposed to feminism, or opposed to their idea of what they think feminism is? What has been like the best tools for you to reach the people that are, um, you know, for you to reach the people that like don't think they agree with feminism or think that feminism is this bad thing? Like, has there been a, you know, specific words or phrases or terminology that you've had to tweak or
Mhm.
change in order for them to be more receptive? Like, what has been the most successful approaches for you in reaching that audience?
Yeah, that's such a yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting. It is like I think those moments are exciting, right? It's sort of like
Yeah.
you're it does feel like suddenly you're in the twilight zone because you're like, wait a minute, everything that I, thought was true is not true, or everything that I thought wasn't true, it turns out to be true. In feminist theory, we kind of talk about it as like these feminist click moments, or sort of like putting on the lens of gender, like putting on these glasses, and then suddenly you see the world, kind of completely differently. And I certainly, yeah, remember those moments, sort of gradually, in
Yeah.
my life, because I also thought feminism was for losers, and like I'm not, was for ugly, mad, lesbian, as if that's a bad thing, like just
Right.
all of the things, right? Like that's a bad, guys don't like you, and people don't like
Hmm.
you. No one likes you if you're a feminist. Like I was a women's studies major in the early 2000s, and I would tell taxi drivers or my boyfriend's parents, or like whenever someone asked me what I studied, I would just say human rights, because I didn't want to get into a debate. Because just saying you studied women's studies, people would be like, some people would be fine with it, but mostly people would be like confused and ask you a lot more questions and say, why aren't there men's studies? And
Yeah.
like, it just, yeah, it would immediately create this debate, and it was nuts, and sort of wild. But I think now, obviously, I mean, there's still backlash. There's still, of the young men now, less of them identify as feminists than the, millennials. So I think there's definitely that backlash is, clear and evident. I think, I think there's two groups, right? Or there's probably more than two, but I see like there are, more, I would say, traditional women, or women who would probably describe themselves as more traditional,
Yeah.
who believe that feminism is destroying, that traditional order that they believe in and that they support and that they, have built their entire reality around. And so feminism to them is, I think, chaos and victim, this victim mentality, and that, I think, I approach. I mean, I'm not trying to, I am trying to convert people at the end of the day, right? Like, I think if you're, I there are, activists who are out there who are like, we don't have to use the best language. We can say whatever we want, and we can be as radical as we want. And like, that's like, we shouldn't be interested in making other people who don't agree with us comfortable. And I respect that, I think,
Sure.
faction of, any kind of activist group. I tend to think that, like, I'm not being a great activist if I'm not converting more people. If I'm just
Yeah.
talking to the same people and we all agree, like, that feels good, but I don't feel that that makes me like effective. So I'm interested in 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 those conversations, right? With people who don't agree with me. But on the other hand, I've been insensitive in the past to, um, I think, a different group of women who don't identify as feminists, um, because they're, women of color. And they've seen feminism
Yeah.
center the interests of white women time and time again, and to, not just center, but like at the detriment of Black women, particularly, but women of colors, rights and existence, really. So I didn't understand that for a while, and like
Hmm.
I look back at that time where I wasn't really listening and understanding what that meant, and so I've come around to actually be totally. I mean, Brittany Cooper wrote a book called it's Eloquent Rage. I'm gonna get it wrong. I think it's Eloquent Rage, and
Okay.
she writes a lot about female anger, and she wrote, really about a Black female with a, emphasis on Black female anger, the whole Black woman, angry Black woman syndrome, right? It's sort of this stereotype, but we put Black women in situations where they, have to advocate for their rights, and then just them doing that and advocating for their own humanity is then viewed as like them being angry, or them, or they're perceived as more angry even that they're expressing. So, and there are all kinds of consequences to that, the adultification of young Black girls, and all of that in our policies, like it's everywhere. But Brittany writes, And I remember reading this and being like confronted with, she was like, we don't, sort of speaking to Black women, she was like, you don't have to join them. You don't have to be in solidarity with white women. And I, was sort of like uncomfortable with that. And then I
Mhm.
had to like be like, why am I uncomfortable with that? And like, I got to think about that. And I got to think about then everything else I've done. Because if that wasn't, something I understood, I probably made a lot of mistakes here. So I think that it's like, I'm not entitled to the solidarity of Black women and I'm not entitled to them joining. I don't think we should feel entitled to them, needing to identify as feminists if they don't.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to do instead of trying to force them, or convince them, is create a movement that makes it enticing for them to be, you
Yeah.
know.
I love that. And I think that it's most of my audience, I'm on a show that's about Jesus and the apostles. So it's like I have a very large conservative Christian audience, and it's been really exciting then doing the podcast and having, like, I just had a Christian drag queen, like gospel singer, that was #1 on the Apple like Christian music charts. And I had Fred Gutenberg, who lost his daughter in the Parkland mass shooting, and people who have perspectives on hot topics that maybe a lot of my audience doesn't agree with or hasn't been exposed to maybe some of these perspectives because of the echo chambers, that we can sometimes find ourselves in. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited for them to hear your perspective on all of this, because I think it's so important. And the thing that's been so encouraging to me is, while there are some, just really angry, hateful people out there, in general, there's been so much openness and to like on behalf of the listeners, to all of these ideas that they may not be super comfortable with or familiar with, but they've been really empathetic and open to hearing them. Um, and I think that's what you do that's so beautiful, is like having grace and empathy for people, and knowing that it's like we all have our own baggage and toxic shit that we're taught growing up, and like that we're all trying to unlearn and better ourselves. And it's like, um, I think that it's really cool that you have the grace and the patience for people to kind of learn at their pace, and kind of come to these realizations, and you give them the space to do it. You're not um like backing people into a corner on
Yeah.
either side and being like, you need to believe what I believe. Like you're just sharing your heart and your all of the things that the knowledge you've compiled over the years. And I think that it's beautiful, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
Thank
uh
you.
of course. I want to ask though, so before I let you go, one, your skin looks great. So I'm getting into
Oh,
like different skincare routines. So what's your
oh,
skincare routine?
oh, I love this question.
Especially as a guy,
Yes,
I want to promote like men taking care of their skin and not
I love
being
that.
embarrassed, and their hair and all that. So yeah.
I love that. Well, first of all, SPF, 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 right?
Okay.
Like the number one thing is, which again, if you were a 90s kid, we didn't drink any water and we didn't wear any sunscreen. Like it was
Yeah.
just, I mean, obviously my mom did berate me for both, but like it just wasn't like a top priority. And now, I really kind of don't leave the house without putting on SPF, and I have a hat on most days too. So I try and really protect my face from the sun. And I think for guys, a really great way to start is with tinted SPF. So I know that that's like a gateway for a lot of guys to sort of start there because, again, it's not a foundation. It's not like you're putting on like something that's cakey or very makeupy, anyways, but
Yeah.
it's a way to get your SPF. And then like you'll notice like, oh, I'm a little bit more even and I like this. So
Yeah.
I think for a lot of guys, that's a good place to start. I use a very simple, CeraVe, like the
That's what I used to.
drugstore,
Yeah.
yeah, drugstore, cleanser. I will do like a hyaluronic acid based whatever, right? Like serum or something like that. So I used to put on like a lot of moisturizer, but it would kind of like clog or like there would be breakouts. And so I really using like a hyaluronic acid based thing. I do like again, I most of my skincare is like drugstore. Like Neutrogena has an amazing hyaluronic acid like moisturizer actually, and
Mhm.
they also have an amazing hyaluronic acid mask. They're like $3 or whatever, but you put on that mask and like once a week and like put it on before if you're going to an event or like you came back from a flight, right? Like when you're like you're dehydrated. It's a really good little hack, and like you can it just like it's so cheap and it really does the trick. Um,
I
I
love this.
also yes, I also then will like do retinol. I'm in
Yeah,
my 30s, so I don't think you should do it. I only started doing it, kind of in my mid 30s, but or there
same.
and I don't want people. You don't have to worry about wrinkles in your 20s, but yeah, like I'll do retinol, retin-A, kind of like one day off, one day on. Vitamin C serum is really good, but again, like I just I don't go overly like I don't put too much. I think
Yeah,
like the skincare routine, if you start adding too many things and you put everything on your face, you're actually again making your face more sensitive to sunlight
right.
and to, or again, like I started like I got this glycolic acid serum to help with like sunspots because in your 30s you'll just notice that you have more of those,
Yeah.
but you have to be really extra careful when you're in the sun, right? So it's like because it can make you more sensitive. So I just like less is more. You can find almost everything at the drugstore. It's like the same.
Yeah,
I don't believe in like $400
right.
serum.
Because some of it's
um
crazy, like the
it's
cost.
insane. Yeah.
I my makeup person on the show yesterday tried a new
Yeah.
product on me that
Okay.
I'm gonna promote now. They're not a sponsor, but maybe if they
Yeah.
hear this, they what is it? Okay, here it is. I just ordered my own. It's Peter Thomas Roth,
Mm.
and it is instant firm eye, like cream, and
Oh, yes.
she put that on me yesterday because I'm really self-conscious about like circles and eye bags. So I've been
Yep.
doing like retinol and all of that as well. But yesterday she put it on under and she's like, you have to be expressionless for like 5 minutes. So I just had to sit there and not move, but you could feel it like tightening.
Oh, oh
And
my
then the rest
gosh.
of the like literally the rest of the day, I felt like it literally
A
tightened it. Like
lift.
it was like a lift, but just cream. And it's like, all the stuff that you were talking about is like in the
Oh,
screen, but you feel it. Like it was, I've never had anything like that, and it was amazing. So
get it. Yeah.
I
I
recommend
love
it.
that. Yeah. And
Um,
sometimes it's like what's great for your skin will be different for someone else's skin. Like it's
yeah,
really about like seeing how your skin reacts to things. And once you find something that works, just like keep doing it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so the last question I have, it's a quick one. I ask all of my guests what is the thing they love most about themselves, and
Oh.
I also want to know what do you love most about men, since that's something that you talk a lot about.
Oh, those are great. What do I love the most about myself? Oh my God. Why? I mean, I guess well, it's on a lot of days I hate it, but I do love how sensitive I am. I think like my sensitivity is again on a bad day annoying. Um, but in the long term, when I think about like would I get rid of that, you know, hypersensitivity basically. Like I'm a total HSP. Like if I think it's like 20% of the population, like a lot of us
Yeah,
are. But I am so on that and I can be very sensitive and it can be very annoying. But it also means that I'm sensitive and I feel things and I feel the bad things intensely, but I feel the good things, I think secretly like a little more. So I'm like, okay, if that's what that I have to feel everything, and that I feel it all, I guess I'll take it. And I think that's also been the driver of my, sort of passion with gender equality. I just think I was very sensitive to injustice, and
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I lived in a family where that was nurtured and heard, and that I have been able to make a career out of trying to change things that I'm sensitive to. What do I love the most about men? That's like hard. There's like so many things. Um, I love um, I love men's devotion. Like, I think that yeah, like, and particularly fathers, I think like devoted dads,
Hmm.
is like something um, I feel that and particularly with my own dad, like, I, how do I put this? Like, I feel that it shows up differently than it does for women, but it is just as strong, if not stronger, in many cases. And so, yeah, I think men's devotion to their families, to um, the safety and protection of the people that they love. I love
Yeah.
that about men. Yeah, yeah.
I love those answers. And
Mm,
I just want to say that I have so much love and respect for you and all that you're doing. And I
me
think
too.
that yeah, you're just making such a difference. And I truly look up to you so much, both as an advocate and as a feminist and as a podcast host and an intellectual and all of the above. So just thank you for what you're doing. And I'm so grateful that we've crossed paths and that we've been able to reconnect. And I can't wait to chat again soon.
Thank you, Jordan. Your work is so important. I hope that you feel it every day, just how many people you're helping with, I mean, not just this podcast, and I'm sure all of the work that it takes to do, but everything that you're, yeah, sharing and doing. It's very different, and it's very um, un like not unappreciated, but just I think we underappreciate how many people are going through, the things that you're talking about, and just
Right.
how seen and heard people feel by you having the courage to talk about them. So you're
Thank
so
you.
great. Yeah.
It's so kind. I'm bad at receiving compliments, so I'm just gonna say thank you and leave it at that.
Thank
Um,
you, Jordan.
thank you. I hope you have a great day and figure out all
Thanks.
of your phone cord
Thank
stuff.
you. Oh my God, what a nightmare. I'm gonna write. I'm like, whatever, probably the millionth person to. I just feel like it should be illegal. Like, I think there should be a law. Like, I don't think
I
you should
know.
make people buy that many. I just think it's so wrong, like on a
Yeah,
fundamental level.
I agree.
That'll be my next book. Uh, but yeah, lovely seeing you, and
Good seeing you
yeah, keep
too.
up the great work.
Will do. You too. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Jordan.
Bye.